वेलकम टू द ब्लैक होल। जब भी इस शहर से कोई गुजरता है जिसकी बात लोगों के की दिलचस्पी की हो तो हम उससे मदऊ करते हैं। आज यहाँ पर फारूक अहमद आए हैं। फारूक मेरे पुराने दोस्त हैं, बचपन के दोस्त हैं। हम स्कूल में एक साथ होते थे और हम अमेरिका भी एक साथ गए। तकरीबन 1 साल का फ़र्क था। जब हम उधर से पढ़ने से फारिग हुए, फारूक उधर ही रह गए, मैं वापस आ गया। फारूक ने MIT से बैचलर्स किया इलेक्ट्रिकल इंजीनियरिंग में, उसके बाद स्टैनफोर्ड चले गए और उसके बाद फिर ईस्ट कोस्ट और वेस्ट कोस्ट का पूरा सफ़र उन्होंने तय किया। ज़िंदगी का बड़ा हिस्सा सिलिकॉन वैली में गुजारा। सिलिकॉन वैली में जो उन्होंने देखा, जो इनके तजर्बे थे, एक्सपीरियंसेस थे, आज वो बयान करेंगे। सिलिकॉन वैली से तो हर एक वाकिफ़ है। ये वो जगह है जहाँ दुनिया की टेक्नोलॉजिकल इनोवेशन, जो नई तख्लीक़ात होती हैं, जो नई ईजादात होती हैं, वो वहाँ पर जन्म लेती हैं। ऐसे क्यों कि इधर अमेरिका का ये मरकज़ बना हुआ है जहाँ से ये सब चीज़ें फूटती हैं। हमने ये देखा कि ट्रांजिस्टर के ज़माने से आगे तक जितना कुछ हुआ है अमेरिका में, और अमेरिका दुनिया का मरकज़ है, वो उधर ही से शुरू हुआ। एक तो आई थिंक देयर वाज रूट 95 where all those MIT people used to make new companies, and then there is Silicon Valley. So Faruq, tell us about your adventures over there, your experiences, what you have seen, and why is it such a exceptional place in the first instance? So over to you.
Thank you, Pervez, and special thanks to the Black Hole for having me here. It's a real pleasure. So what I'll do, as you've suggested, is to go through my experience over the last few decades. But I thought before I did that to take a couple of minutes to reflect on my most recent visit here, which has been after quite a while. And these observations, I think, are relevant to the experiences that I will discuss in a moment. And I wanted to essentially discuss 4 items, or summarize 4 items. First is, what are assets at the end of the day? We think of assets very often as being building and land. But over there in what I'll call the progressive parts of the world, like the US, where I've spent the last few decades, assets are often seen as a result of the application of brain power. So if you look at Silicon Valley, for example, as Pervez mentioned, many of the big companies that we've come to know, whether it's Facebook or Intel or Apple, these have all been created over the years through the application of brain power, the building of teams. So there seems to be a bit of a gap between how we look at wealth and assets here and over there. So that's one observation that I made over the past few days that I've been here. Second observation is that there is a lot of discussion about yesterday. What is history? Where have we come from? What is the right interpretation of history? And this is very important. I do not want to underestimate how important it is, but by and large, Silicon Valley focuses on the future. What do we do with tomorrow that's ahead of us? So how do we look at a situation analysis of where we are today and use brain power to build for tomorrow, to help society move forward in every way? So that's the second quick note, and I'll be very brief and get to my chronology soon. The third observation, my third observation is that there's a focus on knowledge in Silicon Valley, on learning, on teaching, on building up a corpus of knowledge so that society can elevate and lift itself. Belief has a role. It has an important role, but in the balance between belief and knowledge, the priorities tilt towards knowledge. And that is a key part of what's been behind Silicon Valley, and actually, I'd say the West in general, the rise recently. And my fourth observation is that the way we look at things over there is a win-win, not a win-lose. So, and maybe this goes back to how we look at assets. So if we think of assets as being a piece of land, either you have it or I have it. So it's win-lose. But if you look at assets as being brain power, you're really growing the pie. And if the pie starts off this small and you apply your mind, your energy, your focus to working to increase the pie, then it's a win-win. Everybody wins, society wins, you win, and so forth. So these are sort of my four recent observations. Now I'll go back to the chronology.
But okay, I'll hold my question.
Okay.
Yes.
No, please. If
it's win-win, then does it help if, let's say, China discovers a way to increase the semiconductor density by a factor of 3? Then Silicon Valley is pushed. No. Is it still a win-win then?
Okay.
You provoke me, so I have to ask that.
With your permission, can I defer an answer to that question?
Yes.
Because I'll come to that in a moment, but I will provide some context. So over the course of the last few decades, I have had an occasion to work with China and India during its rise. So I was investing in companies in China 20 years ago and with funds in India 20 years ago. So I have personal experience with what they went through in the early stages when they were where Pakistan is today. So your point is very well taken about the geopolitical aspect of it. So if I could come back to it, I'd appreciate that. Okay. But I've made a mental note, so please tell me if I overlook it. So these are just observations sort of as a backdrop, given that I haven't been back for a while. Now, chronology. As Pervez mentioned, we have known each other for a long time. I went to Karachi Grammar School. I got my O-levels, my A-levels. I did my SAT achievement test. I applied to a bunch of universities. I got into MIT, and I accepted. And one reason I accepted was that a good friend had gone there the year before. And this was a Chinese Pakistani friend. So in those days when I was in school, there were people, there were Chinese, there were Hindus, and even some Jews, and Buddhists, and everybody. And it was a very diverse population. So that is just sort of a commentary. I went to MIT. MIT was really where I learned how to think in a way. I learned how to look at problems, how to structure problems, and perhaps most importantly, to ask the right questions when faced with a situation. So I spent 4 years at MIT. I got my bachelor's degree. And then I applied, as Pervez mentioned, to Stanford. One reason, quite frankly, was a bad winter at MIT. I realized I didn't like cold weather as much as some others did. So I was fortunate to get accepted to Stanford in the PhD program in electrical engineering. I actually had my PhD thesis lined up. The Voyager spacecraft that was sent up around that time was passing through the ionosphere, which is this shield around the Earth, and it was transmitting data. And my thesis advisor told me, "Well, look, this data is coming in. You have to sit in the basement for a couple of years, and you'll get your PhD." And I realized that my interests really lay in the real world, so to speak. So I applied to business school at Stanford. Then again, I was fortunate to be accepted. So I got my master's from Stanford, and then went into the MBA program. And for me personally, those 2 years really gave me a fresh look at how, in many ways, the world worked from a different point of view. From a business point of view, but also social policy, asset investment, just the way things actually, the framework we all actually live in. So it's one thing to want to change the framework, and I have many thoughts about that, but to change it, you have to first understand it well, and I understood it well after my Stanford Business School MBA degree. So after that, the fashionable thing in those days was to go into consulting. So I went into consulting, and I realized I didn't like it because most of the time I was giving recommendations to clients, and the recommendations weren't being implemented the way I thought they should be implemented. So it was very frustrating. And the next two jobs I had were really important in helping me to understand what I liked and what I wanted to do. One job was with the world's largest company at the time. It was very well run. In fact, it was on Business Week, which was one of the periodicals as the best run company in the world. Unfortunately, the company couldn't change to keep up with technology. And as a result, it had to be broken up. The company was AT&T. The other company I worked for that helped me to understand my own preferences in terms of work was a company that was growing very fast in the deregulated industry, but not fast enough. It was growing at about 300% a year, which you'd think is a lot, but the industry required it to grow much faster because it was growing into a vacuum literally, and that company was Sprint. So instead of succeeding because it was growing so fast, it ended up being acquired. So that taught me in a way that you cannot use the same measurement for different enterprises. And that I enjoyed environments that were in rapid change, where there was a challenge every day where you essentially had to figure out what to do in circumstances where the future was completely unclear. You didn't know what was going to happen, you didn't have data, you didn't have information, but you had to do something, and doing nothing was doing something. So I found those environments more interesting. And then coincidentally, one day I got a call from an executive recruiter, and he said, Gordon Moore wants to have lunch with you. And I don't know if you've heard of Moore's Law. Has anybody here heard of Moore's Law? Yes. Okay. So Moore's Law basically says that the performance and cost of semiconductor chips will decline by 50% in 18 months. In other words, if you have a chip today that costs $100 or 100 rupees, you can predict that it'll cost 50 rupees 18 months from now and be smaller. So you didn't actually have it today, but the prediction was that it would be that way in the future. What that meant is that you could design a product today assuming the chip would be that small and that cheap, and your customers could design in today's product assuming that you could deliver. And there's no other industry where that is the way things work. So that essentially is the foundation of Silicon Valley. The exponential growth that is enabled by that level of increase in price performance. So the guy who invented that wanted to speak with me, and so my reaction was, tell me when. So I essentially had lunch with him, and I loved the culture at Intel immediately because it was a culture of equals. So he took me to the local cafeteria. We stood in line with everybody else, and when our turn came, we looked for a table and we sat down and had a conversation. I had come from an environment where, everybody dressed in the jacket and tie, and it was very formal. And this was an informal environment where it was clear that everybody's ideas counted, that people essentially were treated with respect as having equal potential as far as brain power was concerned. So I joined Intel, and my experience with what they called Intel culture was very profound, and it really helped me to understand one of the aspects of Silicon Valley that makes it work, which is culture. Now, culture, we think of social culture. This is corporate business culture, and I'll come to that a little later in terms of describing how it works and what the key elements are. So I worked at Intel for a while, and then, a friend of mine, actually from MIT, a Pakistani friend of mine, so the world is a small place, called me up and he said, look, I have this fantastic product, but I don't know what to do with it. He was an engineer and he had stayed on the engineering track. I had gone off on the business track, as I mentioned earlier, and so I took some time and worked with him, and we started our first company together. And this company developed computer language compilers. So computer language compilers in those days, and this is going back a ways, so I won't go into detail, were high performance pieces of software that were at the foundation of building code, building applications for general utility. And so we had great compilers, but the market was such that we essentially got killed by Bill Gates. and there's a story around that, and if we have time, I'll get to it. So what we did was we took the base technology and moved it from computer language compilers into mobile devices. So that was the time when an earlier version of this device was being shipped. And they needed really small, high-performance compilers on which applications could be written. So we did that, and they were tough times those days, and I'll come to the venture capital end of things because the venture capital industry is interesting in itself. But we ended up having a good exit. Our investors were happy. We had raised venture capital. So I was done with that company and I moved on. I joined another friend who I'd known from Stanford Business School days in his firm in venture capital. So I was investing a fund in venture capital primarily in Silicon Valley. And I'll get into further detail if there's interest in how that works. So I will get into it actually. I think it's probably a good idea in a moment or two. And over the time I was doing venture capital, I must have seen hundreds of company plans. So part of my job, and venture capital is a job. It's a hard job. Sometimes people think that you have a bank account and you have a company idea, and all a venture capitalist has to do is write you a check. But it's not that easy. It's really hard to figure out whether a company is going to make it and how you can help. And how you can help is the key thing, because a venture capitalist, even though the word is capitalist, is not really a capitalist. A venture capitalist is a brain power job. So you have to know the area you're investing in. You have to be able to help the company because you're going to be on the board of the company. And if all you're doing is writing a check, you're wasting the company's time and your own. So it's a very difficult job. It requires looking at hundreds of companies to pick one company to invest in. But it was fun because I enjoyed looking at working with different teams and working with new ideas, people who had ambitious goals and being able to, in some instances, work with them to help those goals come true. That was also the time that I worked with investments in China and India. So in China, it was 2002, 2003, and the Chinese system was just starting to get up. They were coming up to speed in venture capital. There was still some naive notions. I remember once an entrepreneur got a check for his company, and the first thing he did was to go buy a Mercedes because they didn't have at that time the distinction between an investment in a company versus a personal investment. But that disappeared very quickly. And the Chinese were as we know from history, extremely impressive in how quickly they understood how to add value in their ecosystem and to take the brain power that was developed either externally or within China and to commercialize it for their purposes, to their needs. India got off to a great start around the turn of the century. And the reason was something called the Y2K problem, which you probably have never heard of. But what happened is that late in the 20th century, people were afraid that many of the programs that were written had only had two digits for the year. So that in the old computer languages like COBOL and so forth, when you had a date, you wrote 85 when you meant 1985, because nobody ever thought that 2000 would be around the corner, and there was great fear that many of these systems would collapse, and these were vital systems. So people looked around and said, where are the software programmers that we can bring in immediately to go through this old code and to do the hard work of taking this code that hadn't been properly documented? Well,
it was a fake scare, but it was as if the whole sky was going to fall down.
Absolutely. And you know, to India's credit, they had this huge reservoir of programmers, and they jumped on it. They provided the expertise needed to go through the millions of lines of code, and you know, it was a fake scare, but it took time to figure that out. And they got an entry into the software market in the U.S. And they, since in the last 20 years, they've done a great job of leveraging that. And I won't go into the details. I'm sure you've read and heard about it. That was my venture capital. Would it be helpful to go through how venture capital works, do you think? Okay, terrific. So there are basically 3 levels to the venture capital ecosystem. The fun part is starting a company. Okay, and having done all 3 levels, I think I always encourage people who have ideas to start companies to follow through on them, because it's the most exciting thing in the world. You have a new idea, you're building a team, and you know, getting that going. The second level is then to find an investor where it makes sense. So in some instances, your company generates cash immediately. You're in the market where you're well protected, and you may not need somebody else to come in and invest in your company and, you know, sit on your head and tell you what to do, because you know what you want to do, and it's a fairly well-established market or well-defined market. In other cases, you need to grow very fast. I gave you the earlier example of Sprint, where Sprint grew by a factor of 300% in a single year, but it just wasn't fast enough because the market, because their competitor, which was MCI, was growing faster. So if you looked at market share, they were losing market share. So venture capital comes in when you're in an environment where you have an advantage and you need to capitalize on that advantage quickly. And when I say advantage, it's not purely a selfish thing, because very often what you're doing is you're bringing something better to the market that will really improve people's lives. And so your mission is to make it available as inexpensively, as broadly, and as quickly as possible. And what capital can do in a situation like this is to play a part in helping to accelerate delivery of your product or service. But then the venture capitalist looks at all the companies in that space. So you have a certain product. Let's say you have a product, a software product that goes into this phone. So it's the venture capitalist's job then to say, okay, you think you have a product that is very special, but let me look at all the other products here and all the other alternatives and confirm that you have a great product. That's one part of it. But a product by itself is not enough to make a company. You then have to build a team. And diversity is key in a team. So if you're a good CEO, if you're a leader, you need to have a terrific engineering or a CTO, Chief Technology Officer, with you who you work with, and others as well, Chief Marketing Officer, depending on the stage of the company, so that you essentially have a team that is able to take the capital and then deploy it effectively. A venture capitalist also helps the company to structure a board. A board of directors is an oversight group that whose job it is to help the company move in the right direction, to confer with the CEO, to guide the CEO, to help with hiring decisions, things like that. So you're on the board and you essentially are with the company every step of the way. You might talk to the company every day. You might have a board meeting every month. So it's a very labor-intensive thing to be an investor in a company, an early-stage company. So that's what a venture capital job is. Now, how does the venture capitalist get his or her money? There are 2 types of venture capitalists. There are what is called an angel investor, and then there are what is called an institutional venture capitalist. An angel investor is a person who has some personal assets and wants to write a check to a company. So let's say there's a company that is making equipment for heart disease or some physical ailment, and or they have a solution for it. and you have a family issue with that ailment, and you are passionate about trying to help solve that problem, and you know the CEO, you have a personal interest in helping solve the problem. So you write a check from your own bank account, and you don't have to check the CEO's credentials, the team, the technology, or anything else, because it's a personal investment. That is an angel investor, because there's no need for what's called due diligence. What an institutional investor typically does is collects money from other investors and puts the money to use with these, or invests the money in companies. So the institutional venture capitalist essentially promises their investors that they will work hard to take the capital that they invest with the venture capital fund and pick the best companies so that the fund succeeds. So typically the institutional investors, at least in the US, are very, very large pools of funds like pension funds and foundations and so forth. And they typically put a small amount of investment in venture capital, because the other element of venture capital is it tends to be risky, because you're investing in companies and most companies do not succeed. If they did, then it wouldn't be venture capital. You'd be putting money in the public markets instead. So what I've described, tried to describe, is 3 levels to the venture capital ecosystem: the actual company that's being invested in, the venture capital fund, and the venture capital investors. They're called general partners typically in a fund, that are trying to find these companies to invest in, and then the investors that actually invest in these funds, that expect these venture capitalists to work very hard to find the best companies. So that basically is the overall ecosystem. So I did that for a number of years, and then after that I did investing in venture capital funds, and more recently I started an advisory group called Palo Alto Capital Advisors, Silicon Valley's Palo Alto. But now I spend a lot of my time mentoring and essentially advising companies and also institutions in different areas. And if I can say a word about that, I've mentioned culture a few times. One of the things about Silicon Valley culture that has helped to promote its durability is that people go out of the way to help each other without expecting financial benefit for themselves, always. And it's a bit of an unusual thing, but people mentor, advise, help, and they do it. If they make a commitment to do it, they expect compensation in stock typically, because they know that companies don't have much cash. They're supposed to use the cash to grow. But in many cases, you can call a lawyer, for example, in Silicon Valley and get a consultation for free. You can talk to somebody at a conference, and if they are interested in you, or if you get along, or if you have an idea that they like, they'll spend a lot of time helping you because they think of the community as an ecosystem in itself, that if we help each other, we will uplift each other, and the place will be a better place to live and a better place to work. So some of the hardest working people I know are people who stopped having to work decades ago. Ostentation and so forth and spending is not something that many people in Silicon Valley always do. There are exceptions, lots of exceptions, but the culture is one of work. And that's the other thing I should mention, is that there is a commitment at every level to enjoy work, enjoy hard work, and to do it as long as you can because you're enjoying it. So the concept of retirement is not one you hear about very often. People do retire. They do work less than 100%. They do other things. But because they are very often doing what they do because they enjoy it. They don't really see any need to stop doing it. They just do it a different way. To stay engaged with people that have ideas and people that have a vision and the energy and the focus and the motivation to try and execute and make things work. That's a monologue right there. But is there anything I can expand on that you think?
Many questions come to mind, many different dimensions. Of course, this kind of community thinking is not the same for all individuals. Obviously, there's Bill Gates, who now has the Gates Foundation, and he looks to curing AIDS and looks to helping out with polio in Pakistan, etc. And then there's somebody like Elon Musk who will who wants to become, who is the richest man on the planet, and he's a cutthroat capitalist. So there are all kinds of different personalities involved and different ideals. And of course, your Silicon Valley might be a community in itself, but it doesn't look too much beyond itself to see what impact it has on the globe as a whole. And then there is competition. So let's come to that now.
Okay.
So this here,
got it,
and China there.
Okay. So first, you asked two questions. First, individuals. Elon Musk, Bill Gates are a perfect comparison. In one case,
opposites.
Perfect opposites. In one case, you have someone who's trying to do good with the billions he has. In the other case, perhaps not. Absolutely. I mean, people have strong personalities. There is no commitment to doing things one way or the other. The point I should have made in that regard is that you'll always find people in both categories. So in other words, if you have a venture that you're trying to succeed in, you'll find people on the Bill Gates side of the equation. So you can avoid people on the Elon Musk side of the equation if you need to. So it's a big community with good and not so good as part of the community. Now going back to the global question. People are selfish. People are self-centered. And Silicon Valley is not filled with saints. Quite the contrary. And the US is focused on its own success. The US is not particularly interested in a competitive sense. So if you help others, and Pakistan is focused on its own success too, or should be, so is China. Every country has an obligation to the people that voted for the people in power. So I vote for my representative because I expect the representative to work for me. And if helping others helps me in the long run, then that's what they should do. So that's kind of the backdrop. And it's no different anywhere, or shouldn't be different anywhere. So if you take China and the US, which is the question you asked earlier, if you'd asked the question a few years ago, the relationship was one of collaboration. Cheap Chinese labor, cheap products for the US, and it was a win-win situation. What has happened recently is that there's a competitive chill. We've all been seeing it, and the two countries are seeing each other as adversaries. So I would think it's natural then for the American side and the Chinese side to reassess what they presumed was true and to focus on what is in it, what they need to do to put their own interest first. And so I would say that there isn't necessarily a conflict with the overall intent, but it's very troubling. The troubling part is that Silicon Valley is a melting pot. And one of the strengths of Silicon Valley is that you can have a management team with people from all over the world. So one of the companies I'm helping right now, the CEO is from Brazil. You can have a company where there are people from, India, China, Japan, all over the place, Romania. And when a foreign country or a foreign people are singled out or targeted, it tends to chill give them a feeling that they are not equal in the environment. And I talked earlier about Intel culture and equality. That gets impacted. So you're absolutely right that this kind of adversary situation with a country like China is having an impact. But the impact is local. So the Chinese Americans in Silicon Valley, if they go to Texas or Mississippi or some of the states where which are commonly known as red states, if you follow American politics, they may not be able to draw a distinction between Chinese and Chinese Americans, and so that would be an issue.
Yeah, and a guy who looks Chinese, is Chinese, would be treated very differently in Silicon Valley and, of course, Boston, Massachusetts, the East Coast, where they would be considered just no different from anybody else. But if he was to go to Mississippi, that might be a very different thing there. Okay, now, you started off by saying that capital is actually intellectual capital. It's not the buildings that you have, it's not even the facilities or the amount of money that you'll be able to bring, it's actually brain power. Now, that brain power comes out from universities, mostly, in fact, to the extent of 90% or more. But there are lots of universities in the United States, lots of universities across the world, but there's a particular mindset which then leads to success or otherwise. I think that's a very important takeaway from your talk over there. But now, given the situation in this country, what we need is a few positive examples of Pakistanis who have made it big in Silicon Valley. What are the 4 names that come to your mind, and what did they do? Tell us a bit about that.
Well, I can give you a couple of names.
More, please.
Okay. I can give you where you can get a long list of names. I can tell you where you can get a list of names.
Okay.
So going back to multicultural equality in Silicon Valley, Pakistanis that have gone abroad or gone to Silicon Valley have done very well in general. I can go back 20 or 30 years. People like Zohaib Abbasi was an early executive at Oracle. And after he finished with that, he joined Informatica, which was a public company that was struggling, and grew it rapidly, turned it around, and then moved on. And currently he's, I think he's a little younger than me, but not that much. And he's still professionally active on several boards. And he is following the Silicon Valley model of working, through his life in different ways, and of sharing his perspective and knowledge with others along the way. Another example is Atiq Raza. Atiq Raza is one of the pioneers in semiconductors, and he has started several companies and continues to do so. He has had exits has done very well, and is integrated again in his own way into the social fabric in Silicon Valley. One of the people that you may have heard of, I don't know if you've heard of the Khan Academy, Salman Khan.
But he's Bangladeshi.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. But
I'll move on to another. I didn't realize.
I'll let you continue.
We don't notice these things.
But अतीक के बारे में मैं आपको थोड़ा सा बताना चाहता हूँ. बड़ा इनकलाबी था. तो मैं इससे पहले मिला था जब हम इस मुल्क में इनकलाब लाना चाहते थे. मार्क्सी लेफ्टिस्ट इनकलाब. हंसना क्यों हंस रहे? अच्छा, तो उधर हम हरिपुर जाते थे, हरिपुर से आगे गांव में जाते थे. ये हरिपुर टेलीफोन फैक्ट्री में काम करता है. इत्तेफाक से मुलाकात हुई और मैंने उसके अंदर जो जोश और जो तवानाई देखी ना, मैंने कहा कि ये बंदा है जो हमारी रहनुमाई कर सकेगा. हालांकि हमारी उम्र तकरीबन बराबर थी, बट ही वॉज एब्सोल्युटली ब्रिलियंट. उसके बाद फिर वो पंजाब यूनिवर्सिटी चला गया, उधर से कोई डिग्री शिग्री की और उसके बाद फिर गायब हो गया. Then the next thing we hear is that he has invented a chip, and the chip is faster than anything else. I think it was the 286, 386 chip or something like that. Chip पे chip बनाया जा रहा था, and he became, I don't know, worth how many $billion? Billions? Few billions? Anyway, so continue now with the list.
Well, I would suggest you go to a website called opensiliconvalley.org. And Open is an organization that essentially brings together successful entrepreneurs of Pakistani origin. It's called the Organization of Pakistani Entrepreneurs, Open. And there's a long list of people there that have been very, very successful. I will add one additional person to the list, among others, is Nazim Karimi, who was he unfortunately passed away last year. But he, after we exited, was my friend who I started my companies with. And after I went to venture capital, he continued on as CEO of several additional companies and had some successful exits. And so he's another example. Let's see, there's a long list of current individuals that are active as well.
Good. So that tells you that it is possible to make it there. But possible is one thing and probable is another. बात ये कि आपके अंदर वो सलाहियत होनी चाहिए, वो सलाहियत जब आएगी तब आप अपना मकाम वहाँ पैदा करेंगे. So why is it that relatively few Pakistanis make it? There's so compared to other nationalities, we're not doing very well there either. Is that right? Is my understanding roughly correct?
Well, it's difficult to do quantitative comparisons, but I think that Pakistanis are doing well, but they could be doing better. And what doing well requires in a place like that is working with non-Pakistanis primarily, which means fitting in well, not necessarily being focused on one's beliefs or backgrounds, but focused in on the common mission. As I mentioned earlier, teams come together in order to make things happen. And whether the other people are, Indians or Hindu or Israelis or Romanians or Catholics or whatever, it doesn't really matter. Nobody talks about these things. You come together with a mission. So part of that requires not being in the community and making the community stronger, but not being in a ghetto. And that's an important distinction. So I think I don't have numbers to say that Pakistanis are less successful. I think Pakistanis are helping each other a lot, and I mentioned Open. Open in particular has been very active, but I think that getting out there, feeling more socially and culturally comfortable in integrating with the community and leveraging the rest of the community is an important part that we all could do better.
That's at the social level, but I think it would be helpful if you could talk about the engineering level. So in terms of capacities that are acquired during one's education, a lot of Pakistanis just opt for softer stuff, basically. They don't want to go into hard engineering. And maybe that's why you don't see them figure prominently in the engineering departments or the science departments of US universities. You do see them to an extent in business and particularly in medicine. You see a lot of rich Pakistani doctors, but you don't see a lot of, people like Atiq Raza. Now, that to me seems an offshoot of our distance from physics and mathematics, which has traditionally been a weak subject for Pakistanis in general. And to my mind, unless that is fixed someday, We will be able to do good business maybe at most, but we won't be able to technologically innovate. Okay. What do you say?
I say absolutely correct. Now, one naturally compares Pakistanis and Indians. We tend to do that, right? If you look at Indians that go to the US, many of them come from IITs. And IITs do a great job of training them in the hard sciences to do the hard work. And I think Pakistanis, by definition, comes from Pakistan. And Pakistani universities need to do a better job of encouraging people to study the hard sciences here in Pakistan so that they're better trained when they're sent abroad. That would give them a head start to doing as well as they can in a place like Silicon Valley or elsewhere. Now innovation is pretty much global. It's in other parts of the US as well. But you're absolutely correct. I think that being able, willing, and having the capacity to focus in on problems, to learn the hard stuff, the math, the physics, and so forth, is critical in moving ahead. In fact, I made a list of what's important, and knowledge and universities are at the top of the list. Now, with startup companies, you have to execute too. So when you get capital into the picture, every day counts. So you can't have a great product and wait for a month for something to happen. You have to get it working tomorrow, the day after. So it's a 24/7 kind of lifestyle. But to do that, you have to have the best team possible. So to make it to the top of the team, you have to be the best possible. So if the CEO is, let's say, American, and the CEO is looking for a chief technology officer, and the chief technology officer, has a background from Pakistan that is not as good, hypothetically, as an Indian alternative with a background from IIT, then, the decision is obvious. So absolutely, if you want to get into the top ranks, you have to be best.
Good. Okay, so now I'm going to open the floor and let's have questions from whoever. And of course, lots of things still left in my mind, so while the mic goes around. You stressed social integration as well, and that's absolutely true. With that means also open-mindedness and a way of looking at life. However, how is it all that important elsewhere in the world as well? I mean, look at China. China's caught up very fast, and it is a pretty closed society. So there seems to be a different model at work over there. Can you tell us of the Chinese model, perhaps in a little more detail?
Sure. And let me make one other quick comment before I get to that. And that is that the other way Pakistanis and Indians have succeeded is to bridge build with their home country. So the Indians did a fantastic job of bridge building, where they have the front company in Silicon Valley and the back office is in India. And the Pakistani organizations, Open, is doing an excellent job, I think, of trying to do the same thing, where companies there are offshoring work to Pakistan. And there are a number of individuals in Open Silicon Valley that are pushing that very effectively. So that's a very good thing. China has state policy. And they have superb universities that they've developed over the years. So they've hired the best professors that they could have access to from the US and elsewhere to come and teach people the hard sciences and to build up their research capabilities. And I don't have an account, but I would imagine that the papers that they've written in physics, mathematics, and other engineering disciplines are of a higher quality with every passing year, because the quality of the teaching has been steadily improving over the past 10 to 20 years. And because their state policy has been for a while to independently be independent and to have excellence as a goal, this is something they've worked towards for a long time, as have the Indians, quite frankly. And both have been remarkably successful. So today, for example, the Chinese believe that they can meet their goals for the next 5, 10, 15 years based on what they're doing. I have questions about that, but that's a different issue.
Before we get to the question, one more thing. The US and China are in a race now on semiconductors, and now with the increase in the number of constraints that China is facing, the hope is that the US will be able to maintain and increase its lead. What is your view on that? Will the US be able to stop China's growth in the semiconductor industry, in IT and everything associated with it?
So that's a very difficult question, but let me take a stab at it. The semiconductor industry is global. So different parts are done in different parts of the world. So, you know, we all think of Taiwan as being the epicenter of the leading edge of semiconductor technology. But the chips assembled in Taiwan use equipment from the Netherlands, from Japan. They use designs from the US. So hypothetically, you know, if China took Taiwan tomorrow, they wouldn't have anything because the rest of the world would simply stop supplying Taiwan with anything. So it's very much a global industry today. So that's one observation. The second observation is that if we talk about the semiconductors at the lower end of the spectrum, which are not at the leading edge, China makes lots of those, and those go into, you know, Internet of Things, and some of them go into cars and equipment of other kinds. Almost everything we use has semiconductors in it now, and they can continue with that part of the market. I think what we think of generally when we talk about semiconductors in China versus the US is we're talking about the leading edge, which has both commercial and military applications in terms of staying at the top. And that's where the competition is. One of the difficulties is that China's success over the last few years has essentially been sponsored by the US. So in other words, the US, among other countries, pushed China into succeeding. So in other words, you know, we ordered stuff from China, we sent technology to China, did a lot of contracts with China, and helped China a lot. And now the tide has turned, and a lot of the Western countries are looking at China in the opposite way. So it's very difficult to know how much of China's success over the past few years can be extrapolated into the future, or whether there is sort of some fundamental issues that they'll come up with. And developing your own industry is fine if the world is going to stand still. But the world isn't standing still. There's a realignment going. And that applies to Pakistan, of course, as well, because, you know, I hear discussion about things going on here, but the problem is that in the outside world, while we are sort of getting our act together, they are continuing to move ahead as well. But that's a long answer to your question, basically to say that it's a tough call, but it's a big and growing market. And at the high end where the competition is, the jury is out.
And at the highest end, just one small thing before, at the highest end, you have quantum computation. And it's as if there is a war effort similar to that of a radar in the Second World War, which is going on with quantum computation here in the US, quantum computation there in China. And you see, it's going to be very important because of code cracking, because of other applications where you can simulate molecules and make drugs that will be able to do practically everything, because quantum computers can work, they don't have to, they can work thousands and even millions of times faster than classical computers. But that's for the future. Okay, so first question.
Hello, sir. Thank you for the insights. Okay, sir, a question that I really ponder upon. is that usually founders take exits from startups. Like we can see people like Ben Hoshwitz, Peter Thiel. They built a great product, but then when the grinding has been done, when they're ready to solve better problems, do more, they somehow are interested into the venture type of things. So why is that? Like they are the people who have been grinding the most, but somehow their interest has been shifted towards financing startups and be on boards rather than doing the core things of problem solving. So why we see these trends in things?
You know, that's a very good question. If you've actually done something, if you've started a company, if you've built a company, you're in a much better position of evaluating others that are trying to build companies. Okay, so if you actually built one or two or three companies and taken them to exit, if you've experienced the real life challenges of trying to get something commercialized, trying to get teams together, trying to meet deadlines, trying to do all the things that it takes to get a startup, then you have a sixth sense that develops when you look at a startup. So I mentioned to you earlier that I've seen hundreds of companies, right? So after you've seen a few hundred companies, when the next company comes in, it doesn't take very long to get a feeling as to what the issues are. And if the company has issues, you can give positive feedback to help the founders, even if you don't invest. So you can say, well, you know, this is a great idea, but here are one or two things to look at. So that's where the positive feedback comes in, right? But you also don't waste time with a company that you know you won't invest in. So that's why very often you'll see the best venture capitalists have a background in starting and running companies, because they can then leverage that to make better investments. Why don't they keep starting companies? Some do. I mean, I have a good friend who's in his 70s, who's still starting companies, and so because they, it's fun in a way. So actually, in every way. So he still has the energy to do it. Others, when they get to a certain point, they say, okay, I've started some companies. It's really hard work, and now I'd like to help others who are starting companies. So it's a positive next step for somebody who's done something a number of times to then help others do the same thing.
Okay, sir, since you've seen countries like China and India grow the startup ecosystem from infancy, which is currently in Pakistan. So apart from a lack of access to funds, venture capitalist fund, what are the trends, or how would this ecosystem emerge in Pakistan? What are the missing facets currently? That there are a lot of challenges, different challenges, that although the founders who are working, they're great, they have great ambitions, everything. But how would this industry emerge in comparison to India and China?
Okay. Well, the good news is it's starting to emerge. So there are a number of funds right now that are investing in Pakistani startups. And actually, this is a good transition from Silicon Valley to what's going on here. So the future is encouraging because brain power is everywhere. I mean, it's in this room. Many of you have great ideas, right? Potentially, you could be founders of startups. So Silicon Valley doesn't have a monopoly and doesn't want a monopoly. So the whole idea is to lift people everywhere. There are a number of venture capital funds, and the funding in Pakistani startups had accelerated in the last couple of years. The other side of the coin is that it has now fallen sharply globally, because what happened in the last few years was that interest rates were low, there was a lot of liquidity, and venture capital everywhere in the world was plentiful. So venture capital funds came in and they invested in lots of startups, many of which will fail, which is okay. But now funds are tightening, their standards are much higher, and it's going to be a lot tougher to raise venture capital funding. But that's good, because that means you'll have to have a better quality startup. So you don't waste your time doing something that's not going to work. and the venture capitalist that invests in you will have much more time to help you to succeed. So, I'm sometimes asked, there are so many layoffs going on at Google and Amazon and so forth, is that bad for the technology industry? And my reaction is, it's terrific. It's good news. Because what happened in the last 2 or 3 years is that these 4 or 5 technology companies grew a lot. And they grew much faster than they needed to. And there's a lot of fat in it. And they hired the best people by paying them a lot. So if you have somebody who's really good as an engineer or a scientist, and Google offers you a lot of money, you say yes, right? So you don't go do a startup because you're working for Google and making a lot of money that way. But now people are being laid off. So the best people that are being laid off will go start their own companies. So from a venture capital point of view, this is a great time to invest in companies, because people who start new companies are going to be really focused and motivated. In fact, the best companies get started in downturns. So if you look at when Apple got started, when Google got started, when Amazon got started, the time was really tough. So Amazon was started, I remember the Amazon Roadshow and Jeff Bezos came, it was 2001. There had just been a huge crash, the dot-com bubble, which some of you may remember. And venture capital was really difficult. He had a difficult time raising money. It's a cyclical thing. What appears for one group of people to be a terrible thing, to be laid off, which I would be if I was the laid off employee, is for the industry not a bad thing, because the industry is coming down into the size it needs to be, and the best people are now going to have an opportunity to do the work needed to build the next generation of startup companies, and the next Amazon and the next Google and so on and so forth.
But this is very provocative. There's a question, but I must ask this. What's important? Is it the progress of an industry making more money more important, or is a better society more important? When you lay off people, you crush their lives. Look at what this man Elon Musk has done by laying off 50% of Twitter. That's criminal. That's criminal. I mean, you've destroyed so many lives by doing that. It might be good for his company, makes him the richest man on the planet, but damn it, what he's done over there is bad. What do you say about that?
I say yes and no. If I can cover both sides.
Say one thing.
So Twitter never made any money. Twitter lost money over the last few years. So here's a company that is vitally important. I mean, I've used Twitter since the beginning. It's lost money. So when you have a business that's losing money and its investors are getting tired of it, what do? Do you keep feeding it money and it keeps losing it? Or do you say, okay, how do I fix it? And how do you fix an existing company so that you do just the right thing? Sometimes you have to, cut 50% and then build it back in the right way. I don't know Elon Musk, and I haven't personally talked to him about his Twitter plans, but that's what he seems to be doing. I think he's outside his area of expertise, so I personally agree with you that what he's doing is probably dysfunctional for Twitter. Now, on the employee side, you're absolutely right. I mean, it does wake up employees that are fired. If they are junior employees that have just started, it might devastate their career for a while. But I'm going back to the opportunity part of it, and there's a concept in the startup world called creative destruction, which I won't go into because it sounds awful. But the idea is that if you have a company, if you have products, you're in markets, and if you're comfortable and you do not destroy your own product, somebody else will. And Intel is a perfect case in point, actually, because the Intel I worked for had a culture where they focused in on their own competitiveness, and they were the first to destroy their own product. In fact, I was at Intel when they got out of the memory business, which was making a huge amount of money, and they got into the microprocessor business. which was completely untested. And if they'd been wrong, the company would have collapsed. So they made the very difficult decision of taking a successful line of business, shutting it down, and putting all their eggs in a different basket, because they figured that what they were doing was going to be obsolete anyway. So I would say that the creative destruction aspect of Silicon Valley is critical in making business decisions, and that these engineers that are working on a product that is not going to be sustainable are better off being on the street looking for a better job.
Okay.
First, thank you. So my question is about a comment you made earlier in the talk for both of you. So what will it take for Pakistani children to get interested in math and physics? I mean simpler solutions, not a tectonic shift in education policy.
That's a question that we really want to see answered, and which we see is not even being addressed in the present national curriculum, which is not oriented towards problem solving or critical thinking, which are in fact education. They're not a part of education, that is education. And so this then has to be something that parents and students themselves will have to take upon themselves. And a few of them, very few of them, are doing this. One tries and helps them as best as possible. One tries to hammer in the point that it makes absolutely no sense to memorize mathematical or physical formulae. What matters is how you look at a problem and how you go about solving it. And so, look, that's your question is, how do you turn society around completely like that? There's a bad history to this. The lack of interest in science, in physics and mathematics especially, is what led to Pakistan becoming pretty much static, and India growing, Iran growing. And it's so fundamental, but people don't seem to understand it. And even people with high degrees and with a liberal outlook say, oh yeah, that's, we should teach our kids physics, math, etc. They don't understand that this is really where all the strength comes from. So it's, that's the challenge.
Yeah. So let me make a comment on that. I think the problem is not just Pakistan. In the US, we have the same problem, which is that kids are going towards the easier classes. So a lot of native-born Americans, would prefer to take jobs in marketing and software areas rather than, go in for the hard sciences. So if you go to a PhD class at Stanford, almost everybody will be Indian or Chinese. I'm exaggerating for effect, but a big percentage will be. So it's a problem because it's easier. But they belong there already. They have the advantage of roots and they have the advantage of family background. And there's a renewal that goes on in Silicon Valley and still in the US, despite recent issues, which is that because it's open to immigrants, it's an opportunity for immigrants to excel in math and science and use that as a stepping stone to success. And that's what many of the folks from India have done so successfully. So in other words, that's how you get in. And the US welcomes it, actually, because that's how the US has stayed ahead. And that's one difference between the US and many other countries, which is it's a country of immigrants. Now, each immigrant group that comes in has to go through hell before they're accepted. When we were in Boston, the Irish were looked down upon. More recently, after 9/11 for the last 20 years, who's had problems, and now it's the Chinese in a way. So it's not one group or the other. Everybody new who comes in has a higher bar to clear, but that allows them to display their excellence and to earn a right to play a part in that country's future, which is what they allow you to do. So increasingly in politics in the US, there are more Pakistanis and more Muslim named people coming in, because slowly they're coming in and they're taking their role in it. Now Indians, I think about 40% of the Fortune 500 have Indian CEOs. The CEO of Google, the CEO of Microsoft, the ex-CEO of Pepsi, the list goes on and on. And they've had a head start, and they've come in and they've risen to that level because of that focus on technical excellence and on hard work and on getting ahead, competitiveness and ambition. So that's something that we can quite easily emulate if we choose to.
Good evening, sir. Thank you so much for telling about the Silicon Valley and what's going on there and what's the difference between others. My question is maybe a little out of conversation, but is from the conversation. You mentioned about the game theory perspective, win-win situation and win-lose situation. If we look from economics, I don't think that there is a win-win situation. Maybe every time you have to lose something if we look from the trade-off perspective or any perspective of economics. Mm-hmm. For example, if you say that you are going to invest in Silicon Valley, then you are trading off from investing in Pakistan, and there's like a lot difference. What do you think about this?
Specifically when I mentioned win-win, I was referring to company level activities, but I'll address your Silicon Valley versus Pakistan as well. So on the company level side, what investors strive for is an alignment of interests. So if they invest in the company, they want to make sure that all the employees have plenty of stock. So if the company succeeds, everybody succeeds. So it's not a question of investors coming and writing a check and then expecting to take all the money out and leave the employees high and dry. So Intel, as an example, created lots and lots of millionaires because even the secretaries had stock, and the stock went from here to here when Intel succeeded. Now, in terms of countries, I mentioned earlier that there are 3 levels to the venture capital ecosystem. At the upper level, there are these large pools where they allocate a small amount of their overall investment to venture capital. And within that, they take a global view. So they say, okay, I've got so much to invest in venture capital. I'll put so much in the US, so much in Europe, so much in India, so much in Pakistan, right? And in each case, I'll try and get the best companies. So there's an allocation mechanism at work. So the capital that's allocated to Pakistan will reflect the perceived risk of Pakistani companies succeeding and returning capital to the venture capital investor. Okay, ultimately, it's an investor. And when an investor invests, even in risky areas, they expect a certain probability of success. And so they have what's called a portfolio, which means they have some investments that are not so risky and some investments that are risky. And they expect to balance out because some of the risky investments will do very well and some of the not so risky investments will fail. So investing in the US, investing in Pakistan is part of looking at the universe from a portfolio standpoint. I don't know if that answers your question, but I hope it helps.
Since this session is streaming live on the Black Hole's Facebook page, we have a few questions from our online audience. In what ways can the government of Pakistan support the growth of the tech industry and create an environment conducive to innovation and entrepreneurship?
An excellent question. And I'd mentioned earlier that I had experience with China and India. The governments played a critical role in making sure that the rules and regulations supported venture capital investments in entrepreneurs. In the case of China, there was a lot of interaction with Silicon Valley, and they copied a lot of the approaches that Silicon Valley had taken, but they modified it for China. In the case of India, many Indians from Silicon Valley came to India. I know some of them in the 1990s, and they worked on the Indian government to change the rules and regulations. In the case of Pakistan, I know there's active discussion going on to try and make it easier for cross-border companies to get started and to succeed, and to encourage that. So the government plays a critical role. Because venture capital is not the same as investing in real estate, property or land, or in public listed companies. It's an activity that is essentially a brain power activity, as I mentioned earlier, and it requires a lot of support from the country, from the government. There are incubation centers, by the way, that are up and running at places like LUMS and elsewhere. I'd mentioned earlier that if you're interested in starting a company, these incubation centers, will be very helpful. I believe they'll be very helpful in providing direction. But the government has a role to play, and I can get into some of the technical rules that are involved in making it easier to invest and to repatriate profits that venture capital investors would require in order to invest.
But that condition cannot be met presently because there are no dollars. You can't pay back in dollars. There's none. So let's see. Let's hope this is temporary.
Well, we take a long-term view.
We take a long-term view, yes.
And the long-term view is positive. I mean, there are two. This is a large country. It's by and large has a tradition which is very similar to the rest of the subcontinent, and when one part is moving ahead, the other part can hopefully the internal issues that you're bringing up can be resolved. One has to be an optimist. Is the way I see things.
Okay.
The next question is, what role can Pakistani diaspora communities in Silicon Valley play in fostering connections and partnerships between the two regions?
They're doing so right now. I mentioned earlier the Organization of Pakistani Entrepreneurs. It's a terrific organization. It's based in Silicon Valley. There are several local chapters. There's a chapter in Boston, a chapter in Washington, chapter in Dubai, a chapter, I believe, in London, and active chapters in Islamabad, Lahore, Karachi. And they, people go back and forth. They have meetings. Companies that have business models that are cross-border, they support those. I mentioned earlier about companies that start in Silicon Valley with back offices here. I know companies in Silicon Valley that are training software engineers here so that they can be ready to provide services for companies over there. So there's a lot of very good work being done, and I think a lot of support a lot of additional support would be welcome to get that, to accelerate that. I should also mention that these are Pakistani entrepreneurs, but historically other organizations have helped as well. So I think there's a general desire to try and uplift and help as much as possible. So I think entrepreneurs here that are motivated have opportunities that they should avail themselves of.
The next question is, how can Pakistan balance the need to attract foreign investment and expertise with the goal of developing its own domestic talent and resources?
I think it'll be easier after the current crisis is over, and hopefully down the road we'll be able to look back at this phase as temporary. I mean, that has to play a part, I think, in the near term in terms of attracting foreign talent. But I mean, I go back to the diaspora because I know that the diaspora, they are entrepreneurs, and there are entrepreneurs here. So in the interim, while the domestic issues are sorted out, there's nothing that is holding back entrepreneurs here and entrepreneurs there from connecting and leveraging the common bond and history to build companies faster and more efficiently. And the government, has a role to play, but it's one of, in many cases, getting out of the way. In other cases, supporting the grassroots training programs that they're already doing. I was at LUMS last week, and I went to the incubation center there at LUMS. An excellent facility, very impressive. And they have several cohorts every year. And I don't know if anybody in this room has been there, but I encourage you, and there are others. I met somebody who's involved with an incubation facility in Peshawar. There's another in Islamabad, in Karachi, and elsewhere as well. So momentum is up and running.
Can you tell us a bit more what's happening in these incubation centers?
I can, based on my knowledge, but I haven't personally been involved with the companies there. But what happens is that they are, so I can tell you what happens in general in incubation centers, because I am an advisor to some accelerators elsewhere. What happens is that you essentially bring in entrepreneurs that have ideas, that want to start companies, give them some funding, give them a place to sit, give them resources and mentorship and advice, and encourage them to move ahead with their business idea to the next level. And those that get it to the next level are then supported in addition to that level of support. A little more money, a little more support in terms of their marketing programs or product rollout plans. And then the hope is that as time goes by, it's a funnel. So you might start with, say, 10 companies or 20 companies, and you may reduce it to half that number and then a quarter of that number, but you end up with companies that are really very good. And in some instances, one hopes world class. So these are companies that can develop. And that's what incubation, the word incubator, you incubate, you kind of bake companies.
I was hoping for some specific local examples, but you may not be sufficient.
Sir, in your talk, you mentioned about building a great culture and developing the brain power within a startup. So as you review and assess startups for investing in that, what are the few key things that you look in a startup that should be present internally within the team that are crucial to convince you that it's a good thing, good team?
Well, the first step is knowledge. They have to know the space that they are trying to commercialize. So let's hypothetically take a startup, in the area of semiconductors, since we're talking about that. They have to know the space. They have to know the competition. They have to have world-class individuals as technical team heads. So that's the first step. Second is they have to have a team. So typically a startup has at least 2 or 3 people, even in very early stage startups. So you've demonstrated the ability to sell to others. So if you have a founder, you have to at least sell to other world-class people to get them excited. So you have a team. Third, they have had to put in personal work. So when there's a lot of money sitting around, I've seen companies be funded based on a business plan and absolutely no product or no work. And now, in general, that has not been the case. You have to put in the work, work if you're working at a regular job, work evenings, weekends, whatever, to get the ball rolling, to prove that you're committed to it. Fourth, you have to have a plan, a business plan. Now, a business plan doesn't have to be a 50-page document. It can be a 5-page PowerPoint, but you have to have a clear idea of what market you're going after, what product you're initially offering in that market, how you expect to get the product to the customers in that segment, how you expect to do it cost effectively, and how you expect to finance it. So initially, if you're going to be using money, how much you need, and how do you know that that's how much you need? Have you done the research necessary? So if you say, well, I'm going to be in the red for a while and then I'll start making money, well, how do you know? So be on top of the data that you're presenting, present the right data, present it well, present it efficiently, and be motivated and ready to work hard, and have a team that is referenceable. Ideally, from universities where their professors, if it's a team coming out of a college, a college where the professors are willing to vouch for their work. So currently, for example, I'm working with a university that has an incubation center. This is not here, so I couldn't give examples locally, but in Silicon Valley, and that's how we do it there. I'm also working with a university in commercializing faculty IP, because one of the things over there is that faculty members engage with startup companies, so that again there's an alignment of interest. So it's a win-win. So if you're a faculty member, you can be an advisor to a company on the advisory board. So in this case, the university is interested in helping professors commercialize inventions that they've made, which is harder than it sounds for a number of reasons. But that's another area where they're trying to make it happen.
Sir, my last question would be of a little like your preference. If you could go back 30 years and you're a 20-year-old young man living in Pakistan, living out the nationalism part, and observing the geopolitics, economic conditions, and the extremism part within Pakistan, what would you suggest your 20 years old self, if you were ambitious to solve global problems through entrepreneurship? Would you consider to be here within Pakistan and solve problems, or would you choose to go abroad, specifically USA?
Well, I would say 30 years ago, let's see, I think I can't remember that far back, can I?
Go back 50.
Okay, go back. I had my 50th reunion at MIT last year, so he knows that. I would say, you do the work where you are. Being in a different place doesn't solve problems. It gives you new opportunities, for sure. I mean, if you magically were went from Islamabad to Cambridge, Massachusetts, you'd be in a different environment with different opportunities and challenges. But there's nothing stopping you from, there may be something stopping you, but I would focus on doing the best you can to educate yourself, to do the hard work where you are. And that's your best bet also to being somewhere else in the future. So I mentioned to you that I was fortunate enough that, I didn't get to go abroad, but I had good grades, right? And I got good scores. And if I can think that far back, I worked hard. I worked hard at MIT to get to Stanford. So at every step of the way, the opportunities you have here and now are the ones to focus on. So, they talk about glass empty, glass full. Look at the glass half full. So, when I have conversations here, people are constantly, good reason, talking about the problems we are facing right now. Spend 10% of your time talking about the problems. Focus 90% of your time on improving your own personal, professional abilities to solve problems locally, nationally, and internationally. Because, some of you may end up solving problems internationally. And the world certainly needs problem solvers. There are lots of problems that we have, both in the country and globally. So I would say be optimistic, look at the opportunities, do the best where you are, which is right here, and that'll give you the best opportunity to potentially be elsewhere in the future if you so choose.
Okay, good. Okay, so last question. Yes.
Hello. I think much of our attitudes about wealth are rooted in cultural conditioning. So in Pakistan, if you look at an average family that consists of people relying on salaried jobs, there's this perception that venture capitalists are the other. They are some sort of the other community. Like, we tend to otherize people who are making money from other sources rather than salaried jobs. So I think my generation, who basically looked at their elders making money from just single salary jobs, let's say during the 80s or 90s, And then, we saw the transition post 2000s, where a lot of focus was on multinational corporations, where MNCs ruled the rooster. But then after a few years, we saw the startup boom. By the time we, basically much of our early 20s, my early 20s were spent figuring out what is working and what is not working. And then by the time we we get inspired to make a conscious decision of getting out of our comfortable careers, which were mostly, motivated by family aspirations. I think, is it like too late to make a conscious decision of switching careers? And also because I think someone like in Pakistan, people are not, inspired to dream big. So it's very hard to, change those family patterns. And also because during your late 20s and early 30s, maybe a lot of people in our circle have already settled into comfortable careers and have started, their families. But then the career that requires you to look at problems and solve problems, and then get connected with the venture capital industry, and I think it's very hard. What is your suggestion for people like me who want to make a conscious shift from their careers and also want some support from their family?
So that's another very good question. So let me give you the China example. 20 years ago, when I was investing in China, the best people went to work for multinational corporations. That's what parents wanted for their children. Because multinational companies were coming into China, they were offering great jobs, great benefits, and they offered reliable employment, right? Then what happened is that some people got involved with the startup ecosystem, and they started to be successful. And very quickly the mood changed. And people like Jack Ma's been in the news, there are several other people, and step by step, the feedback loop started to work. And you'd be amazed how quickly people notice what's going on. So when you're mentioning the cultural aspect, I think, I'm, as I mentioned, by nature an optimist. I think that where Pakistan is where, in this respect, China was 20 years ago. Where, you want your kids to have a stable job. And if you have a stable job, you want to be able to keep it. Right? I'm not suggesting that anybody with a stable job not have a stable job. But I think we will find that stable jobs aren't sometimes as stable as they start out as. So it's a tough question to answer. I don't want to get specific, but I think that these are opportunities, and this cultural transformation is something that individuals end up leading the way out of. And I've seen this happen in India and China, where the cultural transformations happened. I mentioned that earlier on that there were two companies that sort of helped tell me what I wanted. And what I really liked is that I've never done a job for somebody. So I had bosses that asked me, what should we do? And then I said, well, here's what we should do, and here's what I want to do. So in some sense, one of the fun things a part of that is that you can have a startup in an established company. So in some sense, the established company that you're working with is facing disruptive change in their environment too, with technology and market shifts. Move towards the part of that company that is facing the most stress, and be a problem solver. Whether it's a product, whether it's the market, and then you'll get a taste of being an entrepreneur within a large company, right? And you'll find out for yourself whether you want to be in the safe space within the large company or in the fun part. And then if you enjoy helping that large company succeed in their turbulent environment, that may help answer your question as to whether you want to go and do a startup. Because not everybody should be doing a startup. It takes a certain mindset, and it takes a certain type of person. It'll help you to figure out whether you're that type of person.
Inventiveness is key. Let's move on.
Hi, my name is Mohammed Ali. I'm a law student, and I'd like to ask everybody to overlook the simplicity of my question, or if it has already been asked or answered before. So we were talking about how people are choosing easier subjects as we move on, especially in America, marketing. I believe it's easier for us to relate to social sciences or human-related psychology or human behavior subjects. So how can we, for example, in Pakistan, starting at a very fundamental level in the earlier years of life for people, how can we push them towards exploring more technologically, those kinds of subjects? As you were talking about software engineering and all of that, I believe as my personal experience has been either you're good at math or you're not, or you do sciences or not, and it's a block. It's like, oh, I can't do it. It's too difficult for me, or I'm not built for this. So I believe we should start earlier. So how can we do that?
Well, first you should have people come to more TBH events. I mean, I took a look at what they've done, and it's extraordinary. I mean, but having said that, so but set an example is what, and motivate, and the cultural shift. I don't have a better answer than that. But, perhaps there's
this famous book by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. So one part of our brain can do fantastically complicated calculations without us even knowing about it. Like when you're driving a car. I mean, when you're driving a car, the amount of brain power that is needed is just way beyond what a supercomputer can do. So even if you have Google driving cars, they wouldn't be able to function in our traffic over here, because we need to do much more computation than Google is capable of. On the other hand, you do simple math, like divide two numbers by each other, and use or multiply two, and your mind goes very, very slowly, although a computer can do it like that. Okay. Now, there's the easy part, there's the hard part. The hard part, you learn when you're in school at the age of 5, 6, 7, 8, etc. You know what they do in our schools is criminal. Pahade याद कराते हैं यार, क्या उससे कुछ भी नहीं सीखा जाता. Instead, you talk about what multiplication means. That it's a sequence of additions, etc. So we got to start very early, which means you've got to convince society that this is important. And instead of kids learning on their own when they have to, ये जो मोटर मैकेनिक होते हैं, छोटे बच्चे होते हैं, उनकी कोई तरबियत नहीं होती, कोई तालीम नहीं होती, लेकिन अगर आपसे कहो कि इधर जाकर होटल से नान और दाल ले आओ और चाय की प्याली ले आओ और कहो कि उसको पैसे दे दो, तो उसको वो खुद से हिसाब लगा लेगा कि कितने पैसे चाहिए. A kid in school will probably not be able to do that. So we have that innate intelligence. The question is, how do you focus it in, formalize it, then go to the next stage and the next stage? Because, see, physics, math in particular, just builds from the foundations, up and up and up, and then it becomes more and more abstract, until at some point it becomes totally disconnected with the world. But that's not a bad thing. You just go to higher levels of abstraction.
I'm sorry if it's okay.
No, it's necessary. It's necessary. Yeah. But we have to wrap up very soon. After
what you're talking about, like the how we should feel math or physics or science, like we do while we're driving. Like we don't have to consciously think about making a decision. It's just reflex. How could we integrate that into education? Because now education is just like a horse with blinders. People are going, universities even, you're going from assignment to assignment, exam to exam, and you're just going through. You don't want to actually learn, or I don't know, maybe it's not being taught as well. So what can we do to change that, or what can we input into the
You know, I'm a very old-fashioned person, and I still believe in exams, and I think there should be exams, but they should be very good exams, and exams that have questions that challenge you beyond yourself, just a little bit beyond yourself, so that you keep trying and trying and trying, expanding. But don't leave kids without exams.
No, I'm totally up for exams. Would be like a way to test your knowledge or your practical skills. But if we're just focused on passing the exams,
it's so the inner motivation. Where does it come? Where's your inner motivation? And that calls for a different mindset. This universe, why does it work? Why is the sky blue? Why is water wet? Sometimes, and sometimes it's not wet.
Is it innate?
No, it's not innate.
It is innate. If
it is innate, but it has to be nurtured. It has to be nurtured, and it gets less with time. And you can see it in cats, especially when they're very small. They're very curious. They go into every part of the house. When they get old, they say, "We've seen it all." Yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to share something on the question of incubation centers that Pervez asked. There are multiple incubation centers in Islamabad, NIC, National Incubation Center, and almost every university now is having incubation center. I'm currently in 2 of universities, Namal and Islamic International, and they both are they have incubation centers, and the NIC, they also organize coffee, founders coffee club every month. So anyone who is interested in startup or building something, so he can join this as like we are joining in here the black hole. So it's open.
But tell us a little more. Do people come up with inventions, ideas?
No, they don't. They don't.
Well, so if I can you? So you mentioned these incubation centers, and you know I intend next time I'm back to spend more time with some of the companies in the incubation centers, and I understand that in the early stages there are ideas, and you know many times they don't get very far, perhaps. But that's, I think we have to be fairly generous with ourselves. You know, it takes time. It takes time. So I think if there's an investment in these activities, people's mindset changes. So they see the opportunities, even if they aren't quite ready right now. They may be ready next time, or they may encourage others to be readier than they were when they approached these centers. So I think it may take a few sessions or a few years, but I'm delighted to hear that you're in a couple of these centers, and I hope your experience has been good, because this is the kind of investment that is needed to stimulate innovation and to encourage people to think for themselves of careers that are outside sort of the regimented alternatives.
Yeah, but it depends on people when they are ready. And I'm also looking for a co-founder. If anyone in these people, he's having some expertise in technical aspect, IT background. Actually, I'm having a business background and religious studies. I have all my background. So if anyone interested in starting a company, we can contact with each other. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Faruq. We've had a very good discussion.